Hola, buenas tardes. Welcome to another video by Mr. Martin. This video talks about stem changing verbs. In other words, verbs that have a very weird spelling in their stem. Before we get into what stem changing verbs are and how they work, let's remind ourselves of what conjugation is again. In English, this is how we conjugate. I run, you run, he runs, she runs. We spell it a little bit differently. We run and they run. In Spanish, however, it's a little bit more complicated. You change the end of the verb, the stem tells you what it means, the ending tells you who is doing the action. And we have been practicing all of this stuff recently, so it should be fresh in your mind. We also know about the ER verbs and the IR verbs, how they have their own endings, and how the one that's different is the nosotros form, and which brings us back to regular verbs. All we do in English for a regular verb, for present tense, is add an S to the he or she version. But we do have a lot of verbs in English that are spelled really strangely. Let's look at some irregular verbs in English. This is why it's difficult for some people to learn English from a different country, because for no apparent reason, there's a spelling change here. Instead of just adding an S like we did on the word run, we have to change the spelling completely. And this is really confusing for people that didn't grow up speaking English. So it's going to be a little confusing at first when we start talking about verbs in Spanish that have this weird irregularity. For our first verb that we're going to talk about, comenzar. Don't worry about copying anything down yet. I'll let you know when to pause the video. So, for an irregular stem changer, which is what we're talking about in this video, you're going to change the end just like we're used to. There's one extra step though. You have to change the stem. That means taking the E that's in the stem and making it an IE when you conjugate it. So you're going to do that for all of the forms except for the nosotros or the vosotros form. And if that doesn't make sense yet, it's fine. It will make sense when we look at it in a chart. Watch as we see how they're conjugated. The endings are going to be in blue and the stems are going to have a red where there is a change from an E to an IE. Comienzo, comienzas, comienza. Comenzamos, comenzáis, those are the forms that don't change. Comienzan. So, pause this video so that you can copy the chart, copy the slide exactly how you see it, and then press play when you're ready to keep going. All right. Now, another term that people call these verbs are boot verbs, because if you draw the shape of a boot around the chart, you can see that the verbs inside of the boot are the ones that have a spelling change on their stem. The ones outside, these two, don't have the spelling change. Let's look at another stem changing verb just to see the pattern emerge. This one's kind of confusing though. There are two E's in our stem. What is our rule for when this happens? Which E is going to change its spelling? It's the one closest to the ending. So make a very big note of that. It's the E closest to the ending if you have a verb that has two E's in the stem. Here is your ending. There is the E that's going to change when we conjugate the verb. So conjugate this verb with me and then pause the video to take notes. Prefiero, prefieres, prefiere, preferimos, preferís, prefieren. This verb means to prefer. I'll give you a moment to copy it down. Press play when you're ready to continue. Here you can see three other stem changing verbs in this chart. You don't really need to copy the chart down unless you feel like it, but The pattern is it's the same for all of these verbs. The ending changes just like we're used to, and so does the stem, except for the nosotros form. So, a few final things to summarize for stem changing verbs. Step 1, write this down, it's very important. Step 1 is to change the ending. That's the AR, ER, IR part that we are used to. Step 2, change the stem. The E that's closest to the end is going to change. But step 3 tells us not to change the stem if the verb is in the nosotros or the vosotros forms. Another thing to copy down is a small list of stem changing verbs, because how will you know which verbs are stem changers? Well, it's a matter of memorizing and practicing in Spanish. Here is a short list of 5 stem changing verbs. These are the ones that we're going to practice with tomorrow, and I may give you some other ones to practice with when we get to class. So now that you know how stem changing verbs work, take a few minutes to try to conjugate these verbs in parentheses. Remember your steps. Step 1, change the end. Step 2, change the E closest to the end. Step 3, don't change the stem at all if it's in the nosotros form. Good luck, and we will check your answers tomorrow. Buenas noches.